The Honourable Amy Evans.
Mr Chairman, thank you. I did want to take a call on this main part of the Organised Crime and Anti-Corruption Bill and just bring us back to the core purpose of what this bill is actually intending to do, which is significantly enhance the way New Zealand deals with, responds to and prevents both organised crime and anti-corruption. So these are both areas and the matters within the bill are issues that New Zealand takes incredibly seriously. And let's just remember that this bill is about ensuring our protection against organised crime, against human trafficking and against corruption are stronger than they will ever have been. Now, if you listen to the last few speakers from the opposition, you would perhaps, I think, take a few inappropriate conclusions from their contribution. So I just want to get a few things very clearly on the record. The first is facilitation payments are not being authorised by this bill. They have been lawful in New Zealand for many years. The Crimes Act has provided an exemption for the payment of facilitation payments for many years. What this bill does is actually narrow that. We are narrowing the exemption and making it much more controlled, much tighter, and we're ensuring that it can only be applied in situations where no undue benefit accrues to the person involved, and in situations where businesses must record and keep detailed records of any such payments made to ensure that we get the right balance, I believe, between ensuring proper high standards of business practice in New Zealand, at the same time as protecting New Zealanders, innocent New Zealanders, against unintentional criminalisation. Now, that is a serious threat, and we've worked through this in some detail. And I also want to, but I'm going to come back to that point, but I want to make one other point very clear. This bill is in every way compliant with our international obligations. Now, I heard most of Mr Goff's contribution, and he, I think, left this House with the impression that somehow that this bill would make us non-compliant with the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. It does not. It is entirely compliant with it, and that in some way it would make us non-compliant with the OECD anti-bribery corruption. It does not. We are entirely compliant, and I can also make the point that such facilitation payments are also legal in both the United States and Australia. So this idea that somehow we're doing something that the rest of the world has turned its back on, that all of our international partners have rejected, is quite simply wrong. The other point that I would make actually is that Transparency International, the Serious Fraud Office and Business New Zealand got together in 2004 and put up quite good seminars for business on how they should properly deal with facilitation payments. So this is not a new issue. It is one that has been in the lexicon of our oversight agencies for some time, and can I reiterate, this bill makes the exemption more narrow, more tightly controlled. Now let me just walk through the thought process that I followed when I was looking at this issue, because on the face of it you wonder why any sort of payment might be able to be permitted. We have to be incredibly careful, but there are situations when a New Zealander, quite lawfully going about their business, will be in a situation where a foreign public official says to them, look, you can effectively go through the traditional track, or you can have a priority service for the payment of a small fee. Now, that could be an entirely lawful, properly offered service. You are not receiving any material benefit. You are paying for a service in the normal course of business. It is a small payment, and you have no way of knowing, as that innocent New Zealander, what's happening behind the scenes. You have no way of knowing if that payment is being properly accounted for, returned to the government, properly paid tax on, or whether out the back someone's pocketing it. And I'm not going to see innocent New Zealanders who honestly believe they are paying a reasonable sum for a priority service that doesn't give them an undue benefit, is not a large amount of money, suddenly become criminals. Now, the protections that we've put in place around that, I think, are very important. The first is that it must be a small payment. We are talking about very small amounts of money. The second is that it must be for a service provided in the ordinary course of business. So let me give you an example. If you were to arrive at an immigration counter and you were offered to stand in the long line while you have, I don't know, screaming children or you're ill or whatever, or you could pay $50 US and go through the fast track line, that is an absolutely ordinary course of business transaction. An immigration official is offering you an immigration service that is absolutely to be expected in the ordinary course of business. It is a small payment, and these are examples that do happen. It is a small payment, and you receive no particular material benefit. You were going to go through immigration anyway. You are simply going through a priority queue. That is quite different, sir, Mr. Chair.
The Honourable
That is quite different from a situation where you make a payment to receive a contract being awarded to you, to stop someone else getting a contract, or where you receive a material benefit. Now, sir, I absolutely will stand firm against New Zealand corruption, either domestically or internationally, but I am very concerned, and I can think of many situations where innocent New Zealanders could find themselves in that situation of paying for what looks on the face of it to be a perfectly valid service that doesn't give them any particular benefit, and then finding, because out the back that official was pocketing it, they have suddenly become a criminal. And that is not the sort of thing that I'm prepared to oversee. Now, the other thing, Mr. Chairman, is that actually, as I said, facilitation payments have been lawful in a much, much wider context in New Zealand law for many years, and we are assiduous in overseeing them to make sure they are not abused. And that will continue to be the case, but as I've said, under this bill, not only will we continue to be assiduous in ensuring it's not exploited, we have a much narrower selection of areas where it can be applied, and businesses in New Zealand will now be required to quite clearly account for it. Now, I did spend quite a bit of time looking at this issue, working my way through it, and satisfying myself that it was the right balance between properly protecting New Zealanders against a situation that they can have no control over, no way of understanding, and we would be passing a law to unintentionally criminalise innocent New Zealanders, and ensuring we are tightening up any misuse of that provision. And let me just conclude by reinforcing that this is entirely compliant with the UN Convention Against Corruption, and does not in any way fall foul of the OECD Convention Against Bribery. Mr. Speaker, I understand absolutely the need to be very careful in this regard, but I certainly for myself am absolutely confident we have that balance right. It is an improvement on the law as it stands, and any party who votes against it will be voting effectively to keep a much wider exemption, a much wider hole for people to drive through, and will be rejecting the additional protections that this bill will bring into force. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
David Clendon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And could I